Hey guys, welcome back to another raw weathering run through here. So we're going to be looking at another HLCX SD40 today. This is the locomotive I'm going to make. HLCX 8169. Another bone standard BN SD40-2 for the most part. If we look at multiple photos of this thing, it's pretty much similar features of all the other BN locomotives. There's some interesting things about this one. Obviously the class lights were removed, and there's also some repairs done to the end of the long hood. This one has Q fans. This is a late production SD40-2. So the other one we did was an earlier production SD40. This one has the Q fans, thus I had to track down a model that had Q fans. And there's only one run of these they did with Q fans, which is annoying, and it happens to be 8090. There might have been another number done, but I don't remember for sure. Anyways, 8090 has the correct features. It has the silenced exhaust, Q fans, all that good stuff. Of course, these are all details you could add to another, bone standard SD40. Athearn does now make these Q fans as separate parts, but a while back these weren't available, so if you couldn't get a locomotive with Q fans, you couldn't basically build anything, because no one really had these as parts other than A-line, and they were really hard parts to find. So not the worst thing in the world, but I tried to really minimize how much work I actually had to do to this thing, because I already got to repaint the green again, because this is an older, matter of fact, a very old Athearn. This is from like the, I want to say maybe 2008 or 2009 release, and a lot of things wrong with it. Again, incorrect size fuel tank. The green is just, I don't even know what to say about the green, and the handrails are horrendous. You can see the color actually faded, and a double whammy here is that the prior owner glued these handrails to the locomotive, so I'm going to have to try to strip these off, and there's a good chance I might actually damage the handrails on this thing. So that's kind of annoying. Similar to all the other HLCX locomotives, we're going to have to do a little bit of patchwork, and we're going to have to correct the green, like I said. Here, if we look at the hood, you can see the green is basically the same as the 7014 that we did, so we're going to have to repaint all the green on this locomotive. And we're going to have to do some truck detailing, we're going to have to do pilot detailing, hood modifications, cab modifications. Really not much work needed on the top. This thing's pretty good to go out of the box for the most part. It's got all the right features, so like I said, if we circle back here, you can see some of the details on the truck. The cab patching is pretty worn out there. So we're going to have a little bit of work to do, but at least this one is a standard nose. It does not have a nose light, so that does make some things a little bit easier. That being said, I am going to have to try to mask off the chevrons and then repaint the green around them, so that's going to be interesting. But another one of those weird challenges. We'll see if we can actually pull it off. But yeah, again, the handrails and all this is going to have to come off, but as you can see, the handrails are just globs of glue all over. Yeah, it's another one of those. But what do you expect? Try to get these older engines, and you got to expect stuff like this that happens. So, but when we get it all done, it'll be like a brand new engine, just beat to shit and weathered. So we'll go ahead and get started on this. Okay, so the locomotive has been stripped down to its essential components. Now, on the dynamic brake section, we don't really need to do too much. We actually don't need to do too much at all with the roof, which is nice. Anytime I can have an easier build like this, it's always a nice break. But we will need to install lift rings on all the components on the top. On the cab, we're going to need to strip down the lettering on the battery box doors, I should say. And on the front, we got all the parts off there. Don't really need to do too much there. I'll need to plug some holes on this side. On the nose, we'll need to remove the classification lights and do some other details. And on the cab, we obviously got to remove the large BN logos and also clean the cab up a little bit. I'm going to pop the number boards out, and we're also going to have to plug these holes in, because none of these holes are going to match for any existing parts on the cab. The cab is pretty simple in terms of details. Also on the long hood here, we'll need to remove those class lights again, and we'll have to remove these little covers on the top as well, so these covers as well. Unusual. I'm not sure why they removed those on that. That's not something you normally see, but in this case they did that on that. And of course we're going to have to take the lettering off, which is fun on these older Atherns because that ink printing is really thick. So getting started on the build portion, just like the unit we did before, 7014, we're going to be modifying the chassis first. And we're going to be doing anything like the fuel tank, truck frames, all those details I want to do now. And again, it's my newest method of doing locomotives. I find it a lot more enjoyable if I can get the more tedious stuff out of the way, because then I can get to the fun stuff like modifying the shell, detailing the shell. That's the part that I enjoy the most. A lot of the underframe stuff I find very important, and sometimes I do have fun doing it, but sometimes it gets a little laborious, to be honest, especially when I do, 100 side frames and you got to put all the details on them. It's just my personal method of doing this. So I've inspected the chassis, the whole chassis here, and it actually runs pretty well for how old it is. However, probably could use a little bit more lube. I do hear a little bit of binding or a grinding noise from the motor, but it is very free rolling, so at least I have that. I actually have a pretty good motor to start with. Of course it'll be a lot better once I get a decoder in this, and then down the road I can adjust things where needed. But the chassis is pretty much good to go, other than I need to prep it for weathering. I'm also going to need to do underframe details, like I will have to install, I believe, let me see, yeah, so I'll need to do, I believe, the air filter details. On the BN units there's two. I had to do this on 7014 again as well, so I'm going to have to add those to this, but other than that I'll just have to paint and weather the wheels, of course, and the sills. But pretty straightforward. Now, I went ahead and jumped ahead because I knew initially that I wanted to do this unit, so I actually prepped a fuel tank ahead of time. Yeah, look at this. So, I got this guy and built this along with the original tank I did for 7014. I just made them in parallel because all the details are pretty much exactly the same, even though they're different production phase SD40s. The fuel tank layout and everything is pretty much standard. Waste retention tank installed there. You got all the modifications. So this is a shortened 4,000 gallon tank converted to a 3,600 gallon tank. You can see the splice seam is a little rough. Honestly, I could use a little bit more putty there. But once I do some spot filler and things like that, that should conceal that for the most part. But it's detailed and ready to go. You got the dual fuel fillers there, both sides. Cool detail. And all the piping's installed. Now, also getting along to the trucks. What have I done with these? Well, pretty much my standard method for detailing these. I worked on these this morning before I went to work. I got the sanding lines, and then tonight I installed the bearings. So, pretty standard on these HLCX units. A lot of times you see these variations of the bearings. So normally you have the bearing cover, the Hyatt bearing covering. And in this case they removed 4 of them, one on each truck frame, to have the exposed bearing. And this is for multiple reasons. Most of the time it's for inspection purposes, I believe, especially because a lot of these went to CSX. CSX commonly takes the bearing covers off all of their EMD locomotives, and a lot of their older GEs too. Of course, all GEs and EMDs that are built now come without the bearing covers, but this is something they used to do. So I installed Details West caps to these using very simple techniques there. A little styrene backing on the inside of the frame. I just took a little piece of styrene, glued it on the inside there, and then dropped the Details West bearing in, and it fit very nicely in there. And to just drill through these side frames, it's very easy. This is all soft plastic. I use 2 drill bits, and I like to use this guy to start a pilot hole right through the little hole, or the little opening. I use that as the centering point, so you can see why I use this finer bit. Also because if you try to jump in here and use a larger bit on this kind of surface, you're going to shred right through the plastic and screw up your frame really fast. So you use a smaller bit. You can even use one smaller than this to go directly in that hole. Drill your pilot hole first, centered, then you follow behind with a larger bit like this. And that'll do the job for you. So I have all frames finished and ready to go. They just need painting. This is the conductor front, and you can see it has the bearing open there on the back. Then we got the speed recorder cable. running on the front axle. So these are all prepped. I'm going to be taking these down to the basement tonight, and I'm going to be painting all these, but they're pretty much all ready to go. Super easy. So that's all the underframe stuff. Moving on to the body, I've roughly removed the majority of the number on the side of the hood, and I've also removed the Burlington lettering on the battery box doors there, and that's on both sides. We've taken all the handrails and all the different parts off, and you can see we have all that ready to be repainted. So the idea here is that we're going to mask off all the black, and then we're just only going to be repainting the green. So I'll be masking off the air tanks, the steps, walkways, and all this up top. And it seems tedious, but honestly, I can do it in a matter of minutes. I've done it enough times. It's not that hard. You can see there's still a heck of a lot of cleanup and paint touch-up we're going to have to do, but all that will come in time as we progress through the build. The first things first, it's definitely going to be painting the green. Now, there's no details that I can really do right now that are going to need painted other than ditch lights. So what I'm going to do is I'll make the stand ditch lights for the front anti-climber, and I'll paint those in some other parts if I find that I need any with the shell at the same time, so that I'm saving time. So again, you can see I stripped all the lettering off, and it's pretty much ready for that paint step. Of course, I removed the class lights. I talked about that. So we got those nicely sanded and cleaned up. And then on the cab, I've blanked out all the old details and filled those in with styrene and a little putty. I've also removed the BN logos on the side of the cab, and the whole cab itself is ready to get masking and then paint. So of course I'll have to take out the window glazings, and then I'll have to mask out the cab windows there inside the cab, because I generally like to keep those in and then just mask those up, basically. That's how I like to do that. And of course they'll get renumbered. And then the nose, I've completely removed the class lights there, and I've added the little better detailed vent, as you can see. Other than that, nose is bone standard, and it'll just get painted up. I will have to mask off the BN green chevrons, which is annoying, but it'll have to get done. I've removed the grab irons as well, so that's all ready to go. And other than that, they'll be easy to paint. So I gotta double check. I'm pretty sure that this is black on the prototype 8169. If it's not, I'll just repaint that entirely on the nose. But it's gonna be fun having to mask all these stripes off. And then obviously I'll touch up all the paint where needed, like on the white chevron there, because on the BN locomotive itself they actually removed those, and all that was painted and over on the BN engine, so there's no class lights, which is unusual. So that's what I'll have to do with the nose. Other than that, that's pretty much what I got to do, and then it'll be a little pile of detail parts that we got to make, because I make a lot of my own parts, obviously. Let me see. So unless I find something else, next clip you guys are going to see this masked off. And I'll try to kind of show my technique, how I mask it and how I get the clean lines and everything, but it's super easy. So alright, so I got the cab masked off, windows are covered. It's very important to get both sides of the masking. So you can see I covered the outside of the window, but also the inside. Everything's protected, even for potential paint splatter, because you will ruin these windows real quick. And unfortunately with these, they're so tight in there that I couldn't just simply remove them. Otherwise it wouldn't have been as much of an issue. But I was able to carefully mask around them, you can see. So they are protected. Now at the nose here, you can see it's all nicely covered up. I'll have to cover some of the corners a little bit better, especially, most crucially, when I actually start spraying. Once you get one or two coats on to get the nose started, the tape should stay down. It just has a tendency to try to lift off initially when you put it on. I am not going to mask this part off just because it'd be easy to repaint. I can do it if I wanted to. I still might, actually. I still might, just because it would save me some time. but that's super easy to do. It's just another large piece of tape cut to size. The car body, it's the hardest part, obviously, because there's a lot of odd, obscure angles and corners. You can see I covered up the air tanks and then ran the masking all the way down the top hood to only show green here, because that's the only part we need to paint. Same thing on the rear hood and on the opposite side. Not worried about these steps here. I think on the real locomotive the steps are green too. And then if there's any like little corners like that, that'd need to be black. I'm not going to mask that. I'll just touch that up when the time comes. Front pilot should be fine. So the shell's basically ready for paint, and I'm going to go ahead and take this into the basement, and I'll demonstrate painting some light coats of paint on this to get started. Alright, we're down here in the basement. I'm using Tamiya TS35. This is Park Green, and it makes a great green for faded BN green. It's a nice aqua bluish green color. So the key when you do any kind of new paint over existing paint, just like any other paint job, always do light coats. Test your paint first to make sure that you're not going to have any issues with it. Go in just like this, just like if you're spraying primer. You dust the paint on first, just like that. Never, ever, ever go in and try to just start slapping a whole bunch of paint on a model like this right away, because you will get over buildup and then that'll lead to runs. Make sure that you just do small coats, just like that. Then you can come back and do dust coats like this. But again, these are pretty light. The coats I'll do later on will be a lot heavier. So we got it all painted up now, and the green came out really nice. It's that nice subtle bluish faded green, really nice green that appears on a lot of these now, especially the ones that stayed mostly in the east. They kind of faded differently. You look at the ones that BNSF still owns and how that green has moreover turned a yellowish color. Some kind of like a puke green. It's interesting how a lot of these fade, but a lot of the HLCX leasers, again, they have this really interesting faded green, so I don't know what it is about that, but it might just be the locations that they work in, I don't know. Anyways, I did get most of the masking off the cab. I did keep this bit of masking over the windows, and you can see I just started painting the number boards, and I just started touching up some stuff on the cab. Obviously there's more paint touch-up to do, so I didn't go into too much detail here because we still got to do lift rings and some other roof details and stuff like that. So I'll be much more thorough with paint touch-up when I actually get to that step. Painted the number boards over, and the pilots are all pretty much prepped for detailing. I'm not going to paint anything on these until I get all the detailed parts on, and I can just shoot the black on in one shot. So that's why I'm going to do it that way. But yeah, again, the paint came out pretty good. It's nice and flat. Didn't obstruct any details, so it's perfect. And on the nose came out pretty good. You can see I have not removed the striping yet. I'm going to do that tonight. I just got to make this clip before I head to work. Show you guys what I got done yesterday. But the nose is painted, and I also, well, if I didn't drop it, I made a set of ditch lights. This is a set of standard stand ditch lights. I make these with styrene and Detail Associates ditch lights to do those. Super easy to make. So those are all ready to go. Those will be the first detail parts I install on the anti-climber, positioned on each side there. So I'll put those on now that those are painted, and then I'll get the masking off the nose. Looking at the chassis, the wheels have been prepped. Motor got test ran, that did fine there. Let me bring in the truck frames here, or at least one of them, so you guys get the idea. Painted on the weathering. You can see everything's nicely blended in, and these are pretty much ready to get sealed and prepped for powder and oil work. And I have the fuel tank also ready to get sealed up. So it's looking really nice now that it's painted and weathered. At least with the base weathering. We'll have to do all the fine streak details and things like that with powders and oils, but everything's coming along real well. We're working on the pilots right now. Since we got most of the paint masking and everything done, I can start detailing. So you can see I've installed the late phase, or like the late production knuckle brackets, MU receptacles, drop step. And what we're going to work on now is the coupler lift bars. Coupler lift bars can be kind of tedious, I'm not going to lie. One of these days what I should really do instead of building a bunch of locomotives is I should just sit down and make a whole bunch of these coupler lift bars ahead of time, like enough to do 10 locomotives. So it'd be 20 coupler lift bars. It'd be a lot of work, but I got lots of this wire in stock. I buy at least 6 or 7 packs of these whenever I need wire, and I like to just keep it in a drawer, which I have in this closet over here. I really should just make a whole bunch of these ahead of time, because what I keep running into is when I want to build a locomotive, I have to do a lot of this tedious work, which kind of takes the fun out of it. I really hate making coupler lift bars. I really hate making air hoses too. I absolutely hate making air hoses. It all has to be hand bent, hand cut, filed, drilled into place, painted of course, and then I have to install the hose. So it's a lot of work. But back to the coupler lift bars, aside with all that, I am using 0.5-inch phosphor bronze wire. You can use brass wire too. The brass wire is usually a little bit softer, so it's way easier to bend out of shape. The phosphor bronze wire holds a little bit better. It holds its strength, and it's not as easy to bend. It's not as quick to bend, I should say. So it'll hold its form a lot better. I've noticed with the brass wires on past locomotive builds, a lot of times when I use the brass wire, even if I'm not touching those pieces, sometimes those coupler bars that I've made out of brass will bend out of shape, or they'll get little sags in them and things like that. So that's why I will say, you know, I have to be cautious with brass wire. If you're one of those that use actual brackets to install the coupler lift bars, you don't have to worry about it too much. But the way I do my coupler lift bars, I make a simple styrene bracket and then glue it onto the pilot, as you'll see. So it works well in concert with the phosphor bronze wire. But anyways, with this set, this is going to be the rear coupler lift bar. The one that I'm making here, I had an unfortunate misjudgment here, and I thought the piece of wire up top was going to be long enough to be able to form both handholds, and as you can see, I fell short. Way short, actually. So I had to make another out of a scrap piece of wire to match this one, and what I'm going to have to do is install this on the front pilot and splice them together in time. So kind of annoying, but one of the things you got to really work on. You can see I have these kinds of accidents often too. It's not a big deal. You can see this is one I also ran out of enough wire. I didn't cut enough, but at least I have another handle I can use down the road if I need to make another coupler lift bar. So I actually have a couple sets of these that I can reuse. But anyways, that's how I make my coupler lift bars. You just use phosphor bronze wire. Refer to prototype photos because there's different styles of these lift bars, and then you just use a good pair of needle nose or curved needle nose pliers like these, bend them into shape, and then I always use nail clippers, not wire cutters, nail clippers. These give me a much more precise and clean cut. So I always have a pair of nippers that I only use for fine wire. I also have a heavier gauge nail clipper that I use for thicker wire, and then anything past 0.15, that's when I actually use wire cutters. And then I'll go back and I'll file the end down so it's a nice flat butt joint. Anyways, yep, that's how I make the lift bars. I'm going to go ahead and install the brackets, which I'm going to make from 10-inch styrene, install them on both pilots, and get these installed. And I'll show you what these look like. Couple of lift bars are on, and big thing when you install these, make sure everything's straight and even. It has to be symmetrical, especially when you get down to scale. Some of these might get beat up in real life, but it doesn't translate very well on a model because it ends up looking like the part's just crooked, bent, or busted up, and it looks like you didn't do a very good job installing it. I see that mistake made a lot, and it's very important that you keep everything as straight as possible. Same thing, my biggest pet peeve is straight handrails. You see bent handrails all the time on real locomotives, but when it translates in scale, it just looks like your handrails are busted up. So I always try to make sure these parts are straight. Same thing on the front. That's installed, ready for paint. The only other big details are obviously the air hoses and the snowplow. But we'll do the snowplow when we actually get this thing on the chassis again. Before I get too far ahead, I wanted to make a little clip here to address something a couple people have asked me about. Oil washes that I apply to my fuel tank, for example. Oil washes I apply to my trucks, for example. It's a super easy way of doing this. I used to use all powders to do the dusty effects on these trucks, but recently I rediscovered using oil paint is a very, very effective way of modeling a dusty, grimy looking truck. What I do is I spray the entire truck casting after it's been detailed with a mix of earth brown and black. This also can be brush painted. Generally you use a larger brush like this. You can use a smaller brush like this, and you can just work it in all the nooks and crannies of the truck frame, especially making sure you hit the top, ends, and the underframe. These are all important, and these all need to be covered completely for this. I then seal everything with dull coat. After all that's been done, the truck frame should look like this after you've detailed it. So you got this nice subtle dark grime color. This is the perfect setup for the next technique here, which if I zoom out, I'm going to be using Winsor & Newton Titanium White. This is water mixable oil. However, I always use thinner now. I've almost completely eliminated using water because water doesn't dilute this enough to stretch it out. The thinner gives you lots of time to be able to work with it, and also it's just much easier to mix, spread around a little bit. You have a lot more time to kind of render it where you want it to be. So what I do is I use a flat bristle brush, and this is a flat bristle brush I also use for my rib technique on covered hoppers. If you recall, I do a wavy panel trick on a lot of my hoppers. I'm going to use this same technique here. I've taken some of this white off camera and put it on my mixing paper, which is right here, and I have a little cap of thinner here. First thing I do, I wet the truck frame. I'm going to move these out of the way so I don't get splatter on them, and I'm going to prep this out by getting all this wet with thinner. Now, I'm going to take a small little bit off camera, the white titanium paint. I'm now going to mix in just a little bit more thinner to dilute this, and now I come in, I start streaking the paint a little like this, and if you need to, just reach over on your mixing paper or paper plate or whatever you're using to mix paints, grab some more of that the paint, not pigment, paint, and just transfer it back over to the truck frame. Now you can see we're getting a lot of fine streaking. I'm keeping my brush strokes all in a downward motion, representing the streaking. Think rain here, think rain streaking. Gravity pulling it down. You can then take the same brush, streak that paint down, like I said, and you get this really nice effect. Now obviously it's harder to see because the truck frame here is soaking wet with thinner, but when it dries you get this really nice subtle white dusty effect on the truck. That's how I do this technique. Very easy, very simple. This is something you guys can practice on using a pair of blue box trucks, for example. Make sure you weather them first with your acrylic or whatever you're using. Make sure you seal them up with dull coat, and then just practice the brush motions. Make sure everything's streaking down just like how rainwater would travel. Think about that way. Of course, it's not done here. This is just more of the last brush type weathering effect that I'm going to use with paint. I'm going to be doing powder work next, but again, it's a great way to model that, so figured I'd put that in this video so you guys kind of see the technique. And I have 2 more of these truck frames to go, and I'll show you guys what all this looks like when I get it finished. So I got the truck frames reinstalled, and you can see with the right lighting, they look really good. I'm still going to have to clean the wheels off. I'm going to wait to do that until this thing's more over put together. I've not reinstalled the fuel tank, but the fuel tank's ready to go too. I really had to kind of jump ahead a little bit because I started getting busy, but I'll get you guys caught up on where I am now. Obviously I worked on the frame yesterday. I got that done on my day off, and today, excuse me, before work, I was able to get most of the decals on. As you can see, I got the proper HLCX decal on. The warning labels, the cab, or not the cab, but the frame stripes, and some of the old decals reflective labels, things like that that were already there. The patchwork was a little bit tedious. That was done with a little bit of dark green and a little bit of blue, and I just tried to paint match the color in the photos, so it worked out pretty well. This will all get weathered together with the engine, but I think it turned out pretty good. On the rear hood, I got the number boards added. I reinstalled the handrails after I got those painted. All the end details are pretty much applied other than the air hose. You can see all that's ready to go. All the parts have been touched up, painted, as you can see. Frame striping is all done again, all the way down. Step sills painted. Patchwork done. You can see the old number was just simply painted over. And I don't mask that up. I just do it freehand to try to make it look as authentic as possible. And then you can see all the extra warning labels on this side and the patchwork there. I also made my mock-up control stand for the cab. Oh yeah, I gotta show you guys this too. I got a snowplow for this thing and installed that after I painted it, put the grab irons on. I reinstalled the front handrail on this side too. I had to repaint the ditch lights because it turns out they weren't green, they were black. And this one, a bit wonky, they had to replace the housing, so it's actually silver. And in this case, I just painted it with a Sharpie and then painted the ditch light housing itself. Added the tape striping, and then I also added the air hose pipe. The actual air hose will get installed in the final stages of assembly, but that's all been done, and so far so good. It's coming along pretty good. On the nose, this has all been sealed up properly now. I reinstalled the new handrails on the front there, added the decals, the GE inspection decal, painted the handbrake, or the ratchet brake rather. The cab was a little bit frustrating, and I'll explain why in a second, but I did get all the labels on, as you can see, the number boards. The headlight housing is painted, the details are painted, and on the rear, all those decals are put on as well. Okay, so the side patching is interesting. On the cab there, you might see the faint outline of the old 8169 number. Well, what happened here, you're probably wondering. Why would I put the decals on just to repaint over it? Well, what happened was, I looked through my entire set of decals, and I couldn't find the right set of decals, or rather the right font, to match what was on there on the real locomotive, because it has a really thin, narrow font, 8169 number on both sides. So, what I ended up doing was, and this is always how it works out, I found some other decals that I ended up using, and I decided to just go ahead and use them. So I put them on, had everything nicely glossed in, sealed up, dull coated everything, was just getting ready to start airbrush weathering the cab. And just by chance, I re-looked into my decal box, which is right there, my big box of decals, and I found the right set of decals for the cab. They were not even locomotive numbers, they were just from an alphabet set from Microscale, of all things. And they happen to be the correct thin font. I believe they're the Roman, or what is it, the Gothic, really thin font. So I now have the correct numbers for this thing, but the problem was I had already at this point put the other decals on, so I had to repaint those portions of the cab, and I'm gonna have to get another coat on this side, and then re-decal the cab, and then re-gloss coat and re-decal it. So, oh well, could have been worse. Not a huge big deal or anything like that, but a little bit of frustrating because it put me back a little bit, but it's alright. You know, and this is one of those things, some people might not be too bothered by it, but when I'm doing these locomotives, I want them to be as accurate as possible, and especially when it comes to numbers, lettering, labels, I will go out of my way to find the right decals, and if I can't find the right decals, a lot of times I'll have them made. Case in point with the unit 6313, the the chosen one. When I got this locomotive made, no one made the exact font for this, so I actually had a custom decal sheet made for the cab numbers, and the very bizarre font, oops, sorry, for the number boards there, including the standard helm font. All that was custom made by Circus City Decals, thank you Matt, and I actually got that sheet made. It cost me a lot of money, but that's how far I'll go to get authentic labels. I really care about that kind of detail. It drives me crazy if I can't get it right. So again, it's one of those things, you know, some of you guys might not go into that much detail, but I really want to make these things right, so I figured it was worth the effort, you know, to actually put in the time and fix that. So tomorrow, this cab will be wearing a new number, and I'll get it all tied back in, and then hopefully I'll be able to actually start doing the airbrush work. What we got to do next, ooh, excuse me guys, it's really late. It's actually 3 o'clock in the morning. I've been had a late night tonight. It's Friday, so I'm super tired, but I'm trying to film this so I don't lose more ground here and forget to show more stuff to you guys. Let's see. So I was going to do the airbrush fade work to the sides, and what we're going to have to do, just like the 7014, we're going to apply the paint all over the side of the hood, especially on the top. We're going to need to fade that down a little bit. And then, especially on the green, I'm going to take a Q-tip and scrape most of the paint away, leaving only paint in the areas like in between the door seams, weld lines, things like that. Those areas where it'll show a little bit better, because that's how these things weather. So I'm going to be trying to do it that way. I'll hit the nose up a little bit, not too much though. It's really just on the side of the locomotive and the battery box doors mostly. There was a little bit on the cab too, so obviously this will all have to get put to something like this, and I'll just spray it all together to try to match the weathering up. And then one last thing I'll show you guys is I got the leather seats done, the brown leather seats. These are the seats that will be going in the cab, so I got those done today and painted as well. So it's really starting to take shape. It's starting to look like a really nice model, and by the next clip we'll start jumping into the weathering here, hopefully. So I got the truck frames reinstalled, and you can see with the right lighting they look really good. I'm still going to have to clean the wheels off. I'm going to wait to do that until this thing's more over put together. I've not reinstalled the fuel tank, but the fuel tank's ready to go too. I really had to kind of jump ahead a little bit because I started getting busy, but I'll get you guys caught up on where I am now. Obviously I worked on the frame yesterday. I got that done on my day off, and today, excuse me, before work I was able to get most of the decals on. As you can see, I got the proper HLCX decal on. The warning labels, the cab, or not the cab, but the frame stripes, and some of the old decals, reflective labels, things like that that were already there. The patchwork was a little bit tedious. That was done with a little bit of dark green and a little bit of blue, and I just tried to paint match the color in the photos, so it worked out pretty well. This will all get weathered together with the engine, but I think it turned out pretty good. On the rear hood, I got the number boards added. I reinstalled the handrails after I got those painted. All the end details are pretty much applied other than the air hose. You can see all that's ready to go. All the parts have been touched up, painted, as you can see. Frame striping is all done again, all the way down. Step sills painted. Patchwork done. You can see the old number was just simply painted over. And I don't mask that up. I just do it freehand to try to make it look as authentic as possible. And then you can see all the extra warning labels on this side and the patchwork there. I also made my mock-up control stand for the cab. Oh yeah, I gotta show you guys this too. I got a snowplow for this thing and installed that after I painted it put the grab irons on. I reinstalled the front handrail on this side too. I had to repaint the ditch lights because it turns out they weren't green, they were black. And this one, a bit wonky, they had to replace the housing, so it's actually silver. And in this case, I just painted it with a Sharpie and then painted the ditch light housing itself. Added the tape striping, and then I also added the air hose pipe. The actual air hose will get installed in the final stages of assembly, but that's all been done, and so far so good. It's coming along pretty good. On the nose, this has all been sealed up properly now. I reinstalled the new handrails on the front there, added the decals, the GE inspection decal, painted the handbrake, or the ratchet brake rather. The cab was a little bit frustrating, and I'll explain why in a second, but I did get all the labels on, as you can see, the number boards. The headlight housing is painted, the details are painted, and on the rear, all those decals are put on as well. Okay, so the side patching is interesting. On the cab there, you might see the faint outline of the old 8169 number. What happened here, you're probably wondering. Why would I put the decals on just to repaint over it? Well, what happened was, I looked through my entire set of decals, and I couldn't find the right set of decals, or rather the right font, to match what was on there on the real locomotive, because it has a really thin, narrow font, 8169 number on both sides. So, what I ended up doing was, and this is always how it works out, I found some other decals that I ended up using, and I decided to just go ahead and use them. So I put them on, had everything nicely glossed in, sealed up, dull coated everything, was just getting ready to start airbrush weathering the cab, and just by chance I re-looked into my decal box, which is right there, my big box of decals, and I found the right set of decals for the cab. They were not even locomotive numbers, they were just from an alphabet set from Microscale, of all things. And they happen to be the correct thin font. I believe they're the Roman, or what is it, the Gothic, really thin font. So I now have the correct numbers for this thing, but the problem was I had already at this point put the other decals on, so I had to repaint those portions of the cab, and I'm gonna have to get another coat on this side, and then re-decal the cab, and then re-gloss coat and re-decal it. So, oh well, could have been worse. Not a huge big deal or anything like that, but a little bit of frustrating because it put me back a little bit, but it's alright. You know, and this is one of those things, some people might not be too bothered by it, but when I'm doing these locomotives, I want them to be as accurate as possible, and especially when it comes to numbers, lettering, labels, I will go out of my way to find the right decals, and if I can't find the right decals, a lot of times I'll have them made. Case in point with the unit 6313, the chosen one. When I got this locomotive made, no one made the exact font for this, so I actually had a custom decal sheet made for the cab numbers, and the very bizarre font, oops, sorry, for the number boards there, including the standard helm font. All that was custom made by Circus City Decals, thank you Matt, and I actually got that sheet made. It cost me a lot of money, but that's how far I'll go to get authentic labels. I really care about that kind of detail. It drives me crazy if I can't get it right. So again, it's one of those things, you know, some of you guys might not go into that much detail, but I really want to make these things right, so I figured it was worth the effort, you know, to actually put in the time and fix that. So tomorrow, this cab will be wearing a new number, and I'll get it all tied back in, and then hopefully I'll be able to actually start doing the airbrush work. What we got to do next, ooh, excuse me guys, it's really late. It's actually 3 o'clock in the morning. I've been had a late night tonight. It's Friday, so I'm super tired, but I'm trying to film this so I don't lose more ground here and forget to show more stuff to you guys. Let's see. So I was going to do the airbrush fade work to the sides, and what we're going to have to do, just like the 7014, we're going to apply the paint all over the side of the hood, especially on the top. We're going to need to fade that down a little bit. And then, especially on the green, I'm going to take a Q-tip and scrape most of the paint away, leaving only paint in the areas like in between the door seams, weld lines, things like that. Those areas where it'll show a little bit better, because that's how these things weather. So I'm going to be trying to do it that way. I'll hit the nose up a little bit, not too much though. It's really just on the side of the locomotive and the battery box doors mostly. There's a little bit on the cab too, so obviously this will all have to get put to something like this, and I'll just spray it all together to try to match the weathering up. And then one last thing I'll show you guys is I got the leather seats done, the brown leather seats. These are the seats that will be going in the cab, so I got those done today and painted as well. So it's really starting to take shape. It's starting to look like a really nice model, and by the next clip we'll start jumping into the weathering here, hopefully. I just got the airbrush work done here. If we look at it, you can see how I sprayed the entire model, mostly the top, with a white fade. After I did all that, then I took Q-tips while the paint was fresh, and I scraped some of it off the raised surfaces like doors, panels, things like that. So you can kind of see how the white's just sort of dusted into the seams there between doors and weld lines and things like that. And it's all over the engine. And on the opposite side, you can see same thing. I just worked it in. Well, a lot of this will disappear once it's dull coated and blended in, but you'll still be able to get those subtle highlights, which is what I want. So it'll actually blend in pretty well. But this is a good prep for the following weathering. You can see it tied in all of our paint work on the top. You can't tell the areas now that I paint matched. On the cab here, I blended all that in as well. I also got the new number decals on, so you can see I'm going to seal all this in together, and that'll take care of that. The nose is also prepped here. I just faded the top a little bit. Try to keep the nose itself relatively clean from the fade. There's not much on in the prototype, so that's why I kept it like that. I really just hit the top up to make it look a little bit more bleached. So definitely jumped ahead a little bit here, but just because the work was pretty tedious, I had to get in really close. I did all the rust and all the grime on the nose, so the nose is basically finished. You can see that turned out really well. All the paint chipping is done there. On the locomotive, well, actually, let's look at the cab here. There's the corrected numbers all blended in. The cab has been completely weathered. Notice that the number boards are all beat up. That's prototypical. I still need to add the wind deflectors to the cab. They're the small style like most of these BNs had, but it weathered up pretty nice. I just used some oils on the top to prep the roof, and I let this all set up for 3 days before I continued to work. The roof itself, all this was weathered together, that way I could match the rust up, as you can see. So there's a lot of rust on the clean air hatch here. The turbo hatch is pretty clean, but I didn't bother weathering this because this will all be exhaust. But there is some rust on the dynamic blister, a little grime on the horn, and of course the Q fans. That's going to be normally where you're going to see this kind of rust buildup. Attention to detail is focused on rust streaks coming down from areas like the battery box door, where it needs to be. You got a lot of rust streaking in the door seams, a little bit of paint peeling and chipping on the tank, lots of grime washes inside the doors there, and then on the opposite side the same thing. So it all weathered in pretty well. You see there's a lot of streaking, a lot of fine rust rendering. That's all oil, and then it's complemented with the powder work on the deck, and my lighting is terrible here, so I really need to set a lamp up here that shines down so you guys have like perfect lighting, because this doesn't work half the time, does it? So you can see all that's prepped up, ready to go. A lot of rust, a lot of heavy rust on the deck, making it look like this has been sitting in storage for a little bit. That's something you see a lot of times with locomotives that have been pulled out of storage and reactivated. They get a lot of surface rust like this, and eventually it does wash off and wear back off once this gets trafficked. This will be a little bit more subtle once it's all dull coated, of course, too, but all the details are on the plow. Everything's ready for MU cables and things like that. I got the ditch lights installed. You can see the lenses are on there. Rear hood is prepped. And then I also got the handrails painted, so I re-straightened out all these stanchions, and then I painted them the matching green so that these will match properly with the locomotive. So all this is going to get reassembled today. I'm going to put all this back together and go from there. One other little detail I added in the cab that I almost forgot was the speed recorder, or rather the speed gauge, where that's supposed to be in the cab. So when you look at this from the ground, you can actually see it up in there, which I think that's a neat little authentic detail. When you're at ground level, normally when these locomotives go by, you can see those kinds of things inside the cab. Same thing with that mock control stand. So when all that's in there, it really enhances the detail, I think. So, yep, the cab's all done pretty much, other than some small details like the wind deflector, or rather the rear. I think it's just the little mirrors, actually. So I'll put all that together, and then I'll show you guys final assembly here. So I want to go ahead and show you guys the setup in here. I've taped down some of the wiring, and I'll probably do some more taping. With these decoders, it's a little hard to get them to fit exactly underneath the dynamic blister on these models. I may end up having to shave some material underneath here. We'll see if we have to. But for the most part, I got the unit put back together, which is good. But I'm going to have to start fitting it on the decoder. I'm going to take this out to the layout and test it out. And then I'll also just probably get the trucks wrapped up in here, get them coated in powder so I can go ahead and clean them off all in the same step too. So that way while I'm running it I can clean the wheels. But this is going to be the setup for it. You can see I don't have any rear lights in this thing. And I know a lot of people think that's kind of weird, but I always just use the headlight on these anyways. And if I'm going to be running these locomotives for whatever reason, leading a train, I want it to at least have the headlight. I would like to have ditch lights, but eventually I'm going to have to come back and try to get ditch lights installed on all these when I learn how to. But as long as I have the headlight, that's all I care about. I'm not worried about the rear light for the most part, because I'm never going to be running any of these long hood forward, unless it's like a Jeep locomotive. Then I have to have both lighting at each end. But in this case, I just leave these dead, so I don't worry about all that. So I'll go ahead and try to get this shell on, and hopefully we can get this to fit properly. Okay, so I got all the final details on this locomotive, and what the last details are, of course, ditch light lenses, MU cables, the air hose, final weathering touches, and of course the jumper cable. So that's installed on both ends of this locomotive, the A and B ends. And you can see pretty nicely detailed. I just used a little bit of wire cable, Atherton wire cable, painted it, and then I used Detail Associates MU receptacle covers. So all that worked really well, and then I just weathered that in to blend everything together. And then on the other side, the same thing. I did have to add a little hook, a little support hook for the jumper cable, obviously to keep the cable from leaning into the coupler, because you wouldn't want to couple into a giant cable like this with all the voltage. That would not be a good thing. So I installed all the cabling then. The key here is just to make everything look like it has weight, make everything droop down properly. So that pretty much wraps the project up. This one came together very easily thanks to previously doing 7014. After doing 7014, I knew ahead of time what I needed to do to this locomotive, like building the fuel tank, for example, what paints to use, how to weather it. So all those approaches helped out immensely doing 7014 first. So I was able to jump into this project, and other than having to do a little bit of extra detailing to the trucks and some heavier patchwork, this came together very easily, and it was honestly a joy to build. So in all the weathering came out really good. I love that green, that faded limey green with that blue tint. It's very prototypical. The weathering on the fuel tank, the truck weathering looks super nice. I really like the weathering on the top with all that rust. The little details, like the covers on the RS3K, is really nice. I put a little exhaust on the top there, and then I did add the little whip antenna to the top. That's prototypical. That's what's on there on the real engine. All the front details, of course. The nose looks fantastic, and the number boards as well. They're nicely weathered in, as you can see. They're very, very dirty, very rusted, very grimy. I think that looks really cool. I don't normally weather number boards this extensive, but on this particular engine they were really weathered, so I matched all that really well. The nose again came out really good here. I have to excuse my dog here, she's playing with her toy. See, there's a lot of grime coming down from those grills. That's very prototypical. So this end here is the fun side in terms of installing the handrails back on. Big problem with Athearn handrails is a lot of times the stanchions shrink, or they're just too short. A lot of times the length isn't just right, so they're honestly too tight fitting. And so in order to fix the end here, because I had a lot of pulling issues where the front section of the handrails leading up to the cab were pulling this rear end forward, so all these stanchions were at a really crazy angle, right? To correct that issue, I cut this piece of wire out in between these two stanchions meeting the step and inserted my own piece of wire, painted, weathered it, and that's how I was able to do that. Kind of a pain in the ass, but it's something I've been having to do to almost all of these builds lately because I'm just tired of dealing with the Athearn railings. They're really not that great. Even today, even on the Genesis locomotives, you see them. The SD40 ACEs are the worst I've seen. That's why I don't buy any SD40 ACEs, in case you guys are wondering, because the handrails are so bad. Anyways, on the end, all that's nicely weathered in. The rear end looks really nice. I like that patchwork there with the green again as well. Grills are all nicely dirtied up. Fantastic engine. So the next time you see this guy, it'll hopefully be running on the layout, leading a freight train or a sulfur train or something like that. I have a lot of great ideas and plans when I get these locomotives to actually run out on the layout. Unfortunately, I can't run them right now because the layout's under construction again. So, but hopefully down the road you guys will be able to see these engines running, and we'll make some fun videos with them. So I want to thank you guys for watching this build again, and stay tuned for more content. I'll have some more builds like this coming soon. Some weathering videos are coming up as well. I'm in the process of starting some stuff, and I got some updates on the layout coming up too, including another fun edition of scenery work that I'm filming right now, so you guys can stay tuned for that. Subscribe here on YouTube for more content. Follow my work on Instagram and Facebook. Instagram is Danny Dankinson, all lowercase, and on Facebook, Daniel Arnold, that's my name. You guys can follow me there and send me questions if you have them. You guys can, of course, keep an eye on my work there on Instagram as well. So thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you in the next one. Take it easy.